Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and why I think it is actually the best Total War game that Creative Assembly has ever made. Now this might sound very shocking for a lot of people, heretical even for a lot of people, especially those that have been watching my channel for any length of time. But here's the thing, although I make plenty of videos criticizing Creative Assembly and criticizing their handling of Warhammer 3, the lack of fixes, the number of bugs, the number of issues, their DLC practices, the entirety of Shadows of Change, for instance, I do think that what they ended up doing with Warhammer 3, maybe not intentionally, I'm not necessarily going to give them that much credit, but what they did with Warhammer 3 has made it the best Total War game to play at the moment. Now, if we're talking about things from a historical standpoint, sure, you know, when Rome 1 came out, it was an amazing title. When Medieval 2 came out, that was on the next level. And other games as well. Certainly, when Warhammer 3 came out, the perspective on the game wasn't all that positive. But ultimately, through the development of Warhammer 3, through the patches, for the bug fixes, for the balance changes, as well as the addition of course, Immortal Empires, and all the work they had put in previous races in Warhammer 1 and 2, translating those into Warhammer 3 has made this game quite great in a lot of ways. A lot of people right now, including myself, are enjoying the Old World mod, but it has to be pointed out, Old World mod reveals that for all the issues that do exist, there is an excellent game that lies at the core of Warhammer 3, in a way that doesn't exist for other Total War games. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me go over a couple of things, specifically the history of Total War, if you will. We had the Rome 1 period. The Rome 1 period included Rome 1, expansions, Medieval 2, expansions. Now, Medieval 2 is an excellent game to play even to this day. Rome 1, not so much, lots of issues, and we saw that with Rome Remastered. But Medieval 2, absolutely an excellent game, scales well on modern computers, runs well on modern computers, has some really great campaign mechanics, and the battles are certainly workable enough, minus the AI and pathfinding. But when you're considering the AI, the pathfinding, the diplomacy situation, just the decisions the AI makes on the campaign map, it gets annoying pretty quickly in some respects. To be sure, campaign mechanics, recruitment, battles are very workable, and I do think very highly of Medieval 2, even after all those years, but it's certainly a dated game. Like, if Creative Assembly released an updated version of Medieval 2, where they fixed AI, improved on that, made its decision-making far more logical, and something you could work with, and something you could understand, instead of, you know, just thinking that it's YOLOing it, because really many times that's how it feels, it would be certainly a top-tier game. But they haven't done so, and it's not encouraging after Rome Remastered. Then we have the Empire period. Empire period includes Empire, Napoleon, and Shogun 2. You might be surprised by that, but really, Shogun 2 is very much an Empire game just in Japan, medieval Japan. Or Sengoku Jidai Japan. And then before that, and after that, we'll Fall of the Samurai. But you look at Fall of the Samurai, which has always been held highly in high regard by the community. Fall of the Samurai is the conclusion of everything Creative Assembly had worked on for years in that line warfare time period. I mean, for Christ's sake, you got ironclads and Gatling guns in that game, cannons, line infantry. It is an amazing game in a lot of ways. But you do have problems, especially when it came out. Performance issues, stability issues, I mean, hell, balance issues to this very day. There's tons of issues. And one of the things I dislike about Shogun 2 is how very limited the campaign can be if you're playing it without mods. And yes, I do judge these games without mods, because mods should be judged on their own merits, though to be certain, a game having great mods versus a game not having great mods is something that also matters as well. Shogun 2, a lot of the issues in Shogun 2, like the limited campaign, the weak economy that you do have, can be fixed with mods. What mods can fix is things like the diplomacy situation. Though, to be sure, you can remove realm divide, and I've always been annoyed by that particular mechanic. And then we have the Rome 2 period, in which we are still in. This might be surprising to some people because some people consider the Rome 2 period to have ended with Attila. It didn't end with Attila. Rome 2 is still alive and kicking in Warhammer 3. Now, Troy and Free Kingdoms were an attempt, I think, for Creative Assembly to try and move past from that, but they didn't quite succeed. But really, when we're thinking about Warhammer 3, the settlement system, the army systems, or just the Warhammer games in general, settlement systems, balance, campaign difficulty balancing, etc., it's all based on what ended up happening in Rome 2. Like on Rome 2, we got this kind of settlement system with like minor settlements, limited building slots. We got the idea of limited armies, which then got transformed into supply lines. We got other things. Like, for instance, why is it that on legendary difficulty, and this campaign as Gromgor is on legendary difficulty, why is it that on legendary difficulty we get a public order difficulty modifier of -8? Do you know where that came from? It wasn't something Warhammer 1 invented. It came from Rome 2, the precious game held by some in high regard, the precious game that I think genuinely, the fixed version of Rome 2 has caused so many issues in every Total War game that has come out since then because of the fixes. Because this public order modifier didn't come out in Rome 2 originally, if I'm not mistaken. Though, keep in mind, it's been a decade since Rome 2. But I remember playing my initial campaign and not having to deal with this crap. And then comes the fixed version of Rome 2. So yeah, not fond of that. Oh, but DEI is a great mod. It can be a great mod. Rome 2 is still a pile of garbage. And same with Attila. Both run really terribly. Both have many issues. Now, Warhammer already in itself, and I might get into a lot of trouble for saying this with certain portions of the community, but I don't really care how some fanboys of Rome 2 and Attila stand on this. Warhammer vastly improved on Rome 2, if only because of the performance aspect. I understand some people may not care about it, but try and play Rome 2 right now on a modern computer. It runs like ass. The UI scaling doesn't work quite well, which is a bit surprising because Shogun 2, Medieval 2, they certainly handle UI scaling quite better. Hell, even Rome, by Rome 1 does it. Empire, Napoleon less so. Rome 2 and Attila far less so. And that is absolutely a problem. And don't get me wrong, there's issues with Warhammer 1 and 2. But there were already improvements with Warhammer 1. Performance improvements. Some people may not understand how big of a deal moving to 64-bit was, but it was a significant improvement going forward. And then with Warhammer 2, we had the vast improvement in internet times. I want to remind people how awful it was to play Mortal Empires before, what was it, Potion of Speed, if I'm not mistaken. How awful it was before Creative Assembly updated the game and made the end-turn timer significantly better. And it was amazing for us. And we just got to keep in mind that a lot of us did not expect Creative Assembly to actually end up doing something like that. In fact, it was very surprising that they managed to do it at all, I would say, in a large number of ways. That they were able to fix those kind of issues. And while certainly the end-turn timer has taken a turn for the worse with Warhammer 3, the fact that we can have so many factions on the campaign map and we can go for them as quickly as we can in Warhammer 2 Warhammer 3 is a vast improvement compared to where we were before. And while some people don't want to appreciate this as much as they should, yes, game performance actually matters. I get it. Some people don't necessarily appreciate that. There's reasons why the historical community, many reasons why the historical community does hate the Warhammer games, but there's a vast improvement in that respect. But we're still in that kind of Rome 2 engine, Rome 2 period. Though I also have to say, melee combat, armies clashing with one another in Warhammer 1 got vastly improved. Okay, but that's Warhammer 1. What's the difference between Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2, Warhammer 3? Why is Warhammer 3 the best, right? Because that's certainly a very bold claim to make? Well, I feel like when we're looking at Warhammer 3, and actually when we're looking at the Warhammer games in general, like Warhammer 1 was then improved by Warhammer 2. I don't think there's any debate on that subject. I think every single player that's ever played the Warhammer games would fully agree that what ended up with Warhammer 2 was a vast improvement over Warhammer 1 in virtually every respect. Now, of course, the controversy exists between Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3. Realms of Chaos, pile of crap. Immortal Empires as a map has a lot of issues. But here's one of the things I would say that Warhammer did that was a vast improvement over Warhammer 2. Because while Warhammer 2 had a lot of great DLCs, patches, update, improvements, one of the things Creative Assembly never really changed in Warhammer 2, which they did in Warhammer 3, is difficulty in campaign. Some people will argue, oh, Warhammer 3 is too easy. You mean Warhammer 2 was a pile of crap when it came to difficulty design that made campaigns boring, irritated, and really frustrating to play. People want to say, oh, the Order Tide was great. The Order Tide was not great. I think anyone who enjoyed playing certain evil races, especially those that weren't as powerful as the almighty Greenskins once the Greenskins got reworked, then hey, let's not ignore how the Greenskins were before they were reworked. One of the things to mention about that is that how awful that kind of campaign experience could be. Because, like, you would go up, wipe out half a dozen stacks, and hey, a couple of turns later, those armies would return. That's a brilliant campaign design, where the AI cheats on such a level. Now, don't get me wrong, the cheats in Warhammer 2 are nowhere near the cheats of Shogun 2. Like, some people would argue, oh, the AI in Shogun 2 on the campaign level is great. No, the AI in Shogun 2 cheated on a completely different universal scale compared to every other Total War game. What Creative Assembly did, and I greatly appreciate it as someone who does play on Legendary, look, if you're a veteran player, if you've played this game for many years, and you're still playing on normal, I'm not sure what to tell you, really, on that subject. But as someone who plays on Legendary, and I do play on Legendary or very hard for a reason, because it's the only real good experience I can get. Like, normal, you just steamroll everything. There's no challenge. There's no excitement in that. You need to feel that level of challenge. But how that challenge is designed is just as important as there being a challenge in the first place. And I felt, and I have felt this for years, that the way the challenge was designed in previous games, Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2, Rome 2, Attila, God, let's not talk about Attila here, that was awful. But the way that challenge was designed was certainly on the bullshit end. Because you either had the choice, you could either play a campaign on lower difficulty and just end up steamrolling the map rather easily, and that's not fun. Or you could end up where you did have a challenge, but it was the frustrating level of challenge. Oh, you want to use melee units in your campaign? Cute. Get screwed. Oh, you don't want to deal with the unending hordes of Hades that are spawned from a Dyson sphere? Cute. Get screwed. And this is what I think Warhammer 3 really changed for the better. And I do believe that a lot of people should appreciate it far more than it is. First off, supply lines, they were nerfed into the ground. Like, they still are an issue. They still are a downside. But the situation with supply lines is significantly better than it was before, regards to that. So you no longer waste an enormous portion of the economy as you did before. And we have finally, though not fully, but we have finally really moved past the stupid system that Creative Assembly introduced originally in Rome 2 with the idea of limiting how many armies you have. Still, armies still need to be commanded by generals, absolutely. But look at this situation. Like, I'm turn 12 and I'm maintaining 3 armies. To be sure, I'm losing a lot of money over here, but that won't be a problem for much longer once I take Zarnagrund. And yes, if you think the garrison of Zarnagrund is going to stop Grimgor over here and his buddies, oh, you haven't seen anything. Let's just say that. So that's one thing, like the supply line situation, just being able to maintain a lot of armies. But it goes further than that. It goes much, much further than that. While we still have this stupid asinine difficulty level modifier, and we haven't gotten rid of that, unfortunately. Hopefully we will at one point. While we still have that, a lot of other things that were really annoying, especially on higher difficulties, but in general have been improved. Another thing to mention is about how battle difficulty is now handled. Now, beyond the fact that Creative Assembly recently, or rather recently, has added the ability of removing the AI stats modifier, so you don't have a situation where dealing with Skaven slaves is an exceptionally frustrating experience because they just won't route. Because, right, leadership, the leadership benefit in particular, like having a flat leadership benefit was rather frustrating. So you no longer have situations where units with very low leadership would just fight you until the end of time with the courage of the Space Marines, more or less. That's how it felt previously, even in Warhammer 3, but especially in Warhammer 2. Another thing is, while you can now remove the benefits, one other thing that Creative Assembly did change for Warhammer 3 and for the better is they made melee far more viable. Because while you can still get melee benefits for the AI, they are far reduced compared to the nonsense that existed in Warhammer 1 and 2. To be sure, a lot of the racial design, the races that are really good right now, they're good because of changes in Warhammer 2. But difficulty balancing of higher difficulties, or any difficulty really, you could play on normal and still be awful. Like, even on normal with a melee army, it still wouldn't work that great because the AI got those kind of modifiers on pretty much every difficulty, I think, in Warhammer 2. Whereas now we have the ability of removing those modifiers, and even if we played with them on, they're far less of an issue. So the idea of using like a nasty Skulker troll army in a Warhammer 2 campaign, that was suicide, suffice to say. Now, some people will complain about the lack of challenge, but I maintain that the way they handled the challenge in Warhammer 1, 2, and other Total War games was just plain fucking awful. And then finally, the way the AI cheats. Now, the AI has always cheated in Total War, to a degree or another. But it got pretty damn ridiculous with things like Shogun 2, like it was Shogun 2 where they introduced Legendary. It got pretty ridiculous with Shogun 2, Rome 2, Attila, and the Warhammer games 1 and 2. What they've done in terms of AI cheating in Warhammer 3 has significantly improved this. I'm gonna say it, the Warhammer 3 AI is genuinely the best AI in the entire fucking series. Because it's the only AI that can present any kind of level of challenge to the player, any kind of resistance to the player, and make no mistake, they can, without cheating to the stratosphere, which they did in Warhammer 1 and 2. So, like, when you were playing against AI in Warhammer 1 and 2, the AI could get, like, if you were playing on Legendary, the AI would get, like, silver-ranked units within 10 turns or so, without having to fight any battles. It's not like this situation where Grimgor went on a rampage and wiped out Astrogoth and has silver-ranked units. No. It's the situation where the AI would not fight any battles, and yet, enjoyed dealing with at least 1 or 2 stacks of silver-ranked units by turn 12 from every major and AI faction. Another thing that I liked is they clearly differentiated between the major and AI factions. So minor factions will fold very, very quickly, whereas major factions are the ones that are going to dominate the map. Some people may have appreciated the way the AI confederated, and certainly confederations are harder to pull off in Warhammer 3 than 2, though it's certainly doable to do it. Now, maybe Creative Assembly went too much in a certain direction, to be sure, but the fact they improved this in Warhammer 3 versus Warhammer 2 makes Warhammer 3 much better. On top of that, there's also the diplomacy situation. The ability of region trading, the ability of making sense of the AI behavior. But really, the ability of region trading is such a significant benefit compared to what we had before. Because one of the things that you want as a player in these kind of games is you want to have relationships, you want to have the power in a campaign to kind of control the relationships you have with various AI factions beyond just throwing them money. So you being able to give them territory in exchange for positive relationships, getting money in return, makes campaigns significantly better. To be certain, you can cheese it. Absolutely. And there's a way to maintain a very ridiculous level, a ridiculous momentum in a campaign by just trading territory to the AI. But the fact you have the best diplomacy system in quite a while, again, sure, things like Free Kingdoms, things like Troy also do this. They also improve vastly on the issues of diplomacy. In fact, really, the diplomacy of Warhammer 3 is taken from things like Free Kingdoms and Troy. And Troy and Free Kingdoms are much better games than a lot of people give them credit for. The problem is both of them are unfinished. Both of them were abandoned by Creative Assembly. Though they do certainly stand on their own in quite a few ways. Especially Troy, I would argue. But still, lots of issues, because that's what happens when a company abandons a game like this, especially given how Creative Assembly has treated their games, where the initial version is never the best version, and it does take a lot of effort, a lot of content to make them far better. And well, when games get abandoned, that's not great. And this is what makes Warhammer 3 so frustrating. The core elements to make this game great, the campaign designs of a lot of races are great, though not for all of them. They need to be improved. That's what's so irritating about Shadows of Change. Kislev was not improved. Kislev, Kairos were not improved. Cafe got some improvements, but they're also still missing stuff. That's what's so irritating. The Empire, the Dwarves got screwed significantly. For so many years, they have gotten screwed significantly. Like, it's not like the Empire was necessarily that significantly better in Warhammer 2 than it is right now. The Empire has had issues for many years. The Dwarves have had issues for many years. And that's really what's irritating. Like, Warhammer 3 can become so much better than it is. We're at the finish line, Creative Assembly. How about you fucking cross it? That's how I describe the situation. The systems that Warhammer 3 has, the difficulty design, the better balancing between melee and ranged in a campaign, because playing full ranged in a Warhammer 2 campaign was certainly the way to go for any race that had it. And if you're playing a melee-centric faction, get screwed, more or less. The fact that the vampire counts are one of the most powerful races in the game, despite the fact that they only have gotten one DLC, and they're a melee-centric faction, should give you an indication of how Creative Assembly has handled things in Warhammer 3, compared to many other games that they've released. I understand not everyone, in fact, vast majority of people don't play on something like Legendary, but the kind of difficulty balancing I'm talking about doesn't just affect Legendary, it affects all difficulties to a degree or another. The lack of diplomatic options that we've seen in Warhammer 1 and 2 do affect things on every difficulty. So the fact we have better diplomacy, sensical diplomacy, like that's the thing, like when you're playing Shogun 2, you might as well, throw dice to understand how the AI is going to make certain decisions, diplomatically speaking. To be sure, there were, you had a relations bar and you could understand certain things, but there were also certain things that were really irritating. So the AI being far more logical in terms of its campaign decisions is something that makes the experience in Warhammer 3 better. Because you can now predict something that was really hard to do in a lot of other games. You can have a decent level of prediction about how the AI is going to do. And the AI is not just going to screw you over all of a sudden for a random reason. Something that does happen to this day in Medieval 2 is really irritating when it does happen. I understand, like, you can figure out the AI behavior, but it is frustrating that you can never, regardless of what you do, you can never really fully control it. And you think the AI in Warhammer 3 is exploitable? Holy shit, you should see the AI in previous games and how exploitable that is. So it's the best AI, best campaign balancing, best difficulty balancing. It does have its issues. The map layout of Immortal Empires, the map layout of Realms of Chaos, the focus on minor settlement battles and siege battles, the auto-resolve situation, the lack of improvements for certain races. All of those are major issues that do exist. But for all those issues, I do stand on this point. When we're talking about difficulty balancing, AI, diplomacy, and just like the fact that, and the big reason I do think Warhammer 3 is that much better, one of the problems we get on a lot of Total War games is they're very front heavy, in the sense that the biggest challenge, the most important decisions are made in the early game. And that's true in every Total War game, regardless of what we're talking about. But in Warhammer 3, the early game, the balance between you and the AI, the dynamic, if you will, that exists between you and the AI is one of the most balanced in the entire series. It's the one that involves the least amount of bullshit in the entire series, especially in every game that has come out since Empire. I would really like to to say Medieval 2 is better, but Medieval 2 it is certainly an older game. It could genuinely use a remaster. Like, if it got a remaster, as I said, it would be an amazing game. But it hasn't, and it may never get a remaster after the Situation Realm remaster. I'm not certain what's going on with that. People speculate Medieval 3. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more.